Today, we're going to completely flip your understanding of desires, habits, and those relentless urges that just feel totally impossible to ignore. We're literally popping the hood on your own neurobiology to see exactly how dopamine drives addictive behavior.
So let me ask you a question that, honestly, most of us are intimately familiar with. Why can't you stop scrolling at night? You know the feeling, right? You're lying in bed, you know you need to sleep, you're absolutely exhausted, and a big part of you genuinely wants to put the phone down. And yet, your thumb just keeps swiping. You're fully aware of the negative consequences, but you feel completely powerless to stop. Well, why is that? To answer that, we basically have to rethink everything we thought we knew about the chemicals in our head.
That brings us to Section 1, the Great Dopamine Myth. Now, let's dive in by completely dismantling a universally held misconception about human biology.
Okay, so we've all been sold a lie. For decades, pop culture has labeled dopamine as the happiness molecule. You know, eat chocolate, get a like on a post, feel good. That's dopamine, right? Actually, wrong. Discovered way back in 1957 by pharmacologist Arvid Carlson, dopamine is actually the engine of anticipation. It's not the reward itself, it's the chemical released right before you get the reward. It creates this desperate itch to chase it, so it generates an intense feeling of wanting, rather than the actual enjoyment of having the thing.
I love how Dr. Terry Nguyen puts this. She brilliantly states, dopamine is the neurochemical equivalent of leaning forward. It physically and mentally pulls you towards a goal by creating a motivational narrowing of focus. Think about it. When you're endlessly scrolling, your phone isn't actually giving you pleasure, it's giving you wanting. Dopamine is the chemical making you lean into the screen, just dying to know what that next swipe might reveal.
Moving on to Section 2, the brain's craving pathway. Let's see how this builds into the literal, physical machinery inside your head that controls these urges.
Deep inside your brain, you've got this thing called the mesolimbic pathway. Basically, think of a region called the ventral tegmental area, or VTA, as your brain's very own dopamine manufacturing plant. When you anticipate a reward, this plant fires up and shoots dopamine directly into the nucleus accumbens, which is essentially your craving center. Together, they create this intense loop of desire that completely overrides your rational prefrontal cortex. It's wild.
To really understand the sheer power of this pathway, you've got to look at the firing rates. Normally, resting dopamine neurons fire at a slow, lazy 3 to 4 times per second. But the second you anticipate a reward, like say hearing your phone buzz, it spikes tenfold, 30 to 40 times a second. Your ancient hunter-gatherer brain essentially short-circuits, thinking a text message is some kind of life-or-death survival resource. That sudden, massive spike creates that urgent, gotta-have-it-now feeling.
All right, Section 3, the pleasure-pain balance. The absolute crucial point here is understanding how this system regulates itself, which brings us to psychiatrist Dr. Anna Lembke's fascinating concept of homeostasis.
Dr. Lemke describes this using the opponent process theory. So imagine your brain as a self-regulating seesaw balancing pleasure and pain. When you do something highly stimulating, dopamine tips the scale heavily toward pleasure. But your brain, it really craves equilibrium. So to balance out that extreme pleasure, the brain tips the neurological scale an equal and opposite amount toward pain. When the pleasure wears off, boom, you're left in a dopamine deficit state. This is exactly why, after a massive high, everyday normal things just don't feel good anymore.
And this constant tipping leads to a pretty brutal reality we call the tolerance trap. If you flood your brain with too much stimulation, it literally turns down the volume, killing off dopamine receptors just to protect itself. So now you have to consume way more of the stimulus just to feel a normal everyday baseline of pleasure. Eventually, your baseline completely resets to the side of pain. Soon enough, you aren't scrolling to feel good, you're literally just scrolling to stop feeling awful. Which brings us to Section 4, our modern dopamine trap. Let's look at how the modern world actively hijacks this evolutionary wiring with infinite digital novelty. Just look at the massive jump in the middle of this data. Eating a meal when you're hungry spikes your dopamine by about 50%. But social media, that constant novelty, triggers spikes of 150% above baseline. Neurologically speaking, checking your feed has the exact same impact as smoking a cigarette. While it's not the thousandfold increase you'd see with cocaine, the fact that a screen triggers nicotine-level spikes perfectly explains why modern technology is so incredibly addictive, without a single drop of actual chemicals.
And how does tech achieve these massive spikes? By using a psychological trick called variable ratio reinforcement.
Think of your phone as a slot machine right in your pocket. Because you never know exactly when a notification will pop up or how many likes a photo will get, that sheer, maddening unpredictability just drives your brain wild. That uncertainty creates these continuous, self-reinforcing dopamine loops of pure anticipation.
And guys, the physical consequences are very real. Notice the downward trend here. Structural MRI scans show that high social networking addiction literally shrinks the gray matter in your amygdala, the exact area responsible for emotional regulation and impulse control. So your brain actually starts physically resembling the brain of someone with a substance abuse disorder. No joke.
Okay, on to Section 5, restoring your brain's balance. With all of this heavy biology in mind, how do we actually fix it? Let's explore some actionable, scientifically backed strategies from the sources to recalibrate your brain.
The first approach is Dr. Lemke's brilliant concept of self-binding. Look, when you're in a dopamine deficit, willpower simply does not work. Your craving center is totally overpowering your rational thought. Self-binding means creating fast, strict barriers while you still have a clear mind. So you can use physical binding, literally leaving your phone in another room when you sleep. You can use chronological binding, setting strict, non-negotiable time limits for apps. Or categorical binding, identifying the specific triggers that always trap you, and just deleting them completely.
The second strategy? Well, it sounds awful, but it absolutely works. Embrace effort and pain. Yes, deliberately choose pain. By pressing hard on the effort side of that seesaw, through intense physical exercise, deliberate dopamine fasting, or even just sitting with pure boredom, you force your brain to restore its balance. You naturally increase your capacity for everyday joy. Plus, practicing radical honesty and pro-social shame helps break the isolating cycle of addiction and further resets that baseline.
As you begin to implement these changes, keep this profound realization from Dr. Nguyen in mind. She says, the brain wants what it doesn't have. That's the fundamental rule, not a command, just a signal. When that desperate urge to check your phone hits you out of nowhere, realize it's just a biological misfire. It's a signal of anticipation, not a genuine need, and certainly not a command you have to obey. By just recognizing the craving for what it actually is, you instantly strip it of its power.
So, we've explored the myth of the pleasure chemical, mapped out the physical craving pathways, and seen exactly how the modern world engineers traps for our attention. Which brings us to this final thought. Knowing your brain is biologically wired to chase the anticipation of a reward, will you just continue to blindly feed the craving? Or are you ready to embrace the effort required to reclaim your baseline, restore your focus, and finally take back your mind? The choice and the effort is totally yours.